There are so many different formats that you can choose for your own podcast, but it can be a little bit overwhelming coming to a decision on which one you should actually be using and which works best for you. Stay till the end because we're going to have a very short and easy quiz to help you figure out which podcast format is best for you. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Successful Podcasting Unlocked. I'm your host, Alicia Galati. I'm the founder of Galati Media, a full-service podcast management agency where we help business owners launch and maintain lead-generating podcasts. Today's question is, how do I choose the best podcast format for my show? This is a question that we get very often, having launched over 50 podcasts. We understand that this is a very personal decision. So we're going to go through some ideas and some things to consider as we're going through making a decision on which format is best for you. And we go through these same strategies and ideas when we're working with our clients as well. The first thing we need to do is go over what are the different formats that are possible for a podcast. The first is a solo show. That means that it is just one host who is talking about a topic and encouraging their audience to hopefully take that next step with them. Then you have co-hosted. This does not mean that you have to have a co-host every single time. You could have a solo show where you frequently have maybe a friend or someone that you respect in your industry come in to co-host the conversation. In this case, both of you are the experts in the topic or you're discussing it together. There's also multi-host, which same thing, but it tends to be a little more difficult to navigate, especially for your more independent podcasters. If you are someone who is looking to have a multi-hosted show, I do recommend that it is more so for a brand or a group of brand of people or a corporation. That is a great strategy to have, but it can get very complex with all of the moving parts and different people, their schedules, talking over each other. All of that will be very difficult to manage. So think about that as you're considering which format is going to work best for you. Now that we've kind of figured out how the host format is, what about within the episode? There are solo episodes like this podcast where I exclusively talk about the topic. Think also if you are a co-hosted show, then solo episodes mean you don't have someone else coming in to be an expert. For an interview style show, you're interviewing someone who is the leader or the expert in their industry on that topic, or they have something very unique to talk about around the kinds of things that your audience is interested in. Most business shows tend to fall within almost a hybrid of these two topics. So we've got the solo ones or the interview topics. Most business ones, you'll see that there is a group or collection of interviews or a group or collection of solo episodes. I believe at this point, every single client that we have had that has a business show had some form of this group. Now, there's one show in particular that we did help produce where it was just two co-hosts and they were solo episodes throughout the entire show. That is not unheard of. It is still a possibility if you're someone who really wants to show up as an expert, then a solo show is best for you. Now, you have to think about this as you're deciding and coming up with a decision on how you want to approach this. Where do you want to spend your time and effort? Do you want to spend your time, money, and effort on your show being a lead generating machine? Then solo episodes are critical to your growth as a podcaster. But if you're looking to make connections with the right people in your industry or referral partners in your industry, then an interview style show would work best. But keep in mind, at that point, you're not worried so much about the downloads or the listener count. You're worried about how you were able to take those guest relationships to the next level. So we have to consider that and go back to our goals. What are our goals? If our goal is to collaborate with the right types of people, then we're going to end up having a show that might be more interview style than solo episodes. And remember, you can always have 2 podcasts if that's something you're interested in. That is something that I have done with my own show. I have this podcast, and then I have Listeners to Leads, where I interview podcasters about their journey to showcase that there's no one right way to podcast. And that has really allowed me with my solo show to be able to show up as an expert, have all this information that I can give my audience, and then for my interviews, create those connections and collaborations that I want to create with a podcast. Let's go now into the length of your show. Right now, we're seeing 30 to 45 minutes being average, but a podcast episode should only be as long as it needs to be. I'm going to say that again. A podcast episode should only be as long as it needs to be. Keep in mind that if you are someone who likes to talk or has a lot to say, it might be worth either cutting those episodes into chunks or setting the precedent right away that you are someone who's going to be more long-winded. And that is okay. We've seen shows have success across the board with both of those types of formats. So you get to decide how long your show is going to be. Next is the consistency. How often are you going to show up? Is it going to be weekly, bi-weekly? Those tend to be common. But again, go back to our episode where we talked about your capacity. What is your ability to show up for your audience and say, every Thursday, I'm going to be here, or every other Tuesday, I'm going to be here for you. That is how you can set that precedent for your audience without burning out, which obviously we do not want you to burn out from your show. Another way to approach your show could be more seasoned. So instead of having a regular, consistent release date, you say, I'm going to show up weekly for 6 months, and then I'm taking 3 months off. And then I'm going to show up for another 6 months, and then I'm taking 3 months off. You get to decide which one is going to be best for you. And no one else can tell you that. It's really going to be determined on your capacity and your ability to show up in a consistent way. I would recommend that if you are not sure, then start off with a 6-month period of having a podcast and then make that decision toward the end. How are you feeling? Do you feel like you could keep going, or do you feel like I actually might need some space and time to rearrange my life or rearrange this content in a way that really feels right for me and for my audience? Finally, let's talk about the content within your episodes. If you are someone who has more solo episodes or even has interviews, then you might be realizing that you're showing up for those conversations slightly different. For a solo episode, maybe you feel the need that you have to script out the entire thing and then read it to your audience. Or maybe you're someone who is, here, I've got an outline, or I have a general direction I want to go, and y'all are going to be along with me. This is going to be a ride. That could also be your approach. Or you're someone who, like me, has an outline to help you stay on task, but you still allow yourself to go with the flow a little bit and see where the podcast ends up going. You could also do the same thing for interviews. Maybe you send those questions ahead of time, or you have those questions listed out. I would recommend that this is something you practice on. I have listened to too many podcast episodes where there's no back and forth conversation. There's no understanding or digging deeper into the topic because the host is so fixated on their list of questions. So try to be a little flexible. On the Listeners to Leads podcast, we had my friend Kim Romaine talk about how to be in the flow and go with the flow of an interview, especially as someone who maybe is neurodivergent and really wants to stay on task, but it has a really hard time shifting from that task or from that list of questions. So I definitely recommend going and listening to that episode. She gives some really insightful tips and practical things that you can do to do better in an interview style show. So now that we have all the information and the options laid before us, let's go ahead and try to make a decision on what kind of show you're going to have. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You're going to have options A, B, C, or D. And then depending on which one you end up answering A, B, C, or D most, that should help you determine which one you should most likely consider as your podcast format. Now, the first question is, what is the main goal of your podcast? A, be a recognized expert in my field. B, share inspiring stories and interviews. C, connect with like-minded people and build community. Or D, generate leads and sales for my business. Number 2, how comfortable are you speaking solo for extended periods? A, very comfortable. B, somewhat comfortable. C, not very comfortable. Or D, open to both solo and interviews. Number 3, how much time can you dedicate to podcasting weekly? A, several hours. B, a few hours. C, an hour or less. Or D, flexible schedule. Number 4, what type of content do you most enjoy creating? A, educational and informative. B, inspirational stories. C, conversational discussions. Or D, a mix of all 3. And last question, number 5, how do you best express yourself? A, structured presentations. B, sharing personal stories. C, engaging conversations. Or D, adaptable to various styles. Now, if you answered mostly A's, solo podcasts with educational content is going to be best for you. If you answered mostly B's, then co-hosted or interview formats with an inspirational focus should be something that you should consider. If you answered mostly C's, then interview-heavy podcasts that talk about community and conversation and growing together is probably going to be the best one for you. And if you answered mostly D's, then you're flexible. Experiment and find your perfect fit. Now, remember, this is just a starting point for your ideal format. This is not an end-all be-all. This is what you should do. Not at all. Don't be afraid to try new things, to try different things, get out of your head and maybe experiment. And you can let your audience know, hey, this is an experiment. This is something I want to play with the format a little bit. Let me know what you think and get your audience engaged and interacting in that way. I hope this was helpful in helping you decide what your podcast format is. And if you made a decision on your podcast format, let me know. Send me a DM at alicia.galati. I am happy to talk through this quiz with you, as well as if you were looking for more strategy, book a strategy session. I'm happy to help you really define and figure out which format is going to not only be best for you as a person and as a content creator, but also will be best for your goals. It always goes back to what are those goals that you're trying to achieve and how can you actually achieve those? Your podcast format has something to do with that. So book a strategy session. If you're interested, you can go to galatimedia.com/strategy. We have the link in the show notes as well. Until next time, happy podcasting.